It's a pleasure to speak with you today about Woman of the Hour. Um, how do you like that title? I think that wasn't your original title.
Yeah, no. First of all, yeah, thank you. It's great to catch up. Yeah, I like the title. So originally it was Rodney and Cheryl, which was a little bit of a nod to the Bob and Carol, Ted and Alice sort of title, where it's kind of about relationships and dating, but this is obviously a much darker version of that. And I also just like the way in which it weighted the character, because my big concern was that it was going to be called like the dating game killer or something like that, where because titles aside, aesthetics aside, they weight the movie in a very particular way. It's like before Boyhood was Boyhood, it was 12 years. And when you watch it as 12 years, you go like, oh, they're all the main character. But as soon as you call it Boyhood, he's the main character. And I was worried that the focus was going to be too much on him. But Woman of the Hour, conversely, puts the focus on her. So I love it. I think it's great.
It's nice. I think that's why you see a lot of modern artists just sticking with untitled because they don't want that. Yeah. So, what initially interested you? Was it the dating game aspect? Was it Cheryl? Was it something about Rodney? Was it something about the specific women that he brutalized?
Yeah, so the thing that I thought was interesting was because I had been looking around for a true crime story that seemed um useful and interesting and worth exploring. And I stumbled upon this, and there's something sort of interesting and sort of attention grabbing about the dating game aspect, but that's not enough to make you want to spend years of your life working on something. And so I started researching it, and I read an interview with a coworker of Rodney's who said like, "Oh yeah, he used to bring in photo albums to work of like naked underage girls and boys." And as soon as I read that, it made me realize that the story isn't really about Rodney. It's about everyone around Rodney, and it's about um, systems failing, and it's about people looking the other way as a way of enabling his behavior. And the sort of, extension of that is that, it's not a serial killer movie per se. It's a movie about the spectrum of misogyny. And so the spectrum I find interesting. Serial killers are very simple. Like they're psychologically simple, they're sort of narratively simple. I feel like we look at them in a particular way where they are this kind of moral and psychological black box where they feel impenetrable, but they actually feel like puddles that we assume must be an ocean, uh, because they're trying to have this very dark itch scratched, and it really is kind of as simple as that. And so if that's not the thing that's fascinating, if that's not the thing that's going to motivate you to spend years of your life on something, what is? And the kind of larger structural forces, I think those are complicated, and those are interesting. And so that was the thing.
And I think the film does a great job in a lot of little subtle ways of showing on every level how women are failed or how people are complicit and perpetuating this brutal system. Um, but you finished writing this, I think, maybe 7 years ago. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what's changed in the process? I'm sure it's been a large process, but if you could sum it up.
Yeah, so I started writing it 8 years ago, actually. Um, it's a weird thing to say finished because it didn't, we were making changes during the filming of it, so even then it wasn't exactly finished. So it's really only been finished for maybe like 2.5 years, something like that. Or maybe it's closer to three now. No, two. Uh, Yeah. So basically there's the A storyline, which is the dating game narrative, where it's about Cheryl, who's this young sort of struggling actress who agrees to go on the dating game as a way of like getting a little more attention career-wise. And she has this very sort of odd encounter with a person she doesn't yet know is, an incredibly dark person. And that's been pretty consistent from the beginning. That really hasn't changed a lot. There's a lot of that has been the same for 7.5 years. It's the B storyline where we will flash back to the other killings that has changed the most. And the reason for that is like, Rodney was, it's a weird, it's weird to put it this way, but he was good at what he did. He had a lot of victims. And so there's a lot to kind of select from. And depending on what you choose to include, you are going to shape the themes and the ideas of the piece in various ways. Rodney preyed on kids, and for a while we explored the possibility of that. To not include it, you kind of worry that like maybe you're whitewashing the movie. The problem is, ultimately it's the you have to cut out certain things in order for to be a movie. And what the theme that made the most sense to Anna and I was it's about sort of the risks one takes when they choose to be intimate with another person. How do you know you're picking the right person? And with kids, that seems a little adjacent because they're not choosing anything. He's literally just pulling up beside someone and saying, "Hey, your parents told me to pick you up." And the kid has no idea. And so they hop in the car and then their life is ruined. Um, and so, you know, he was deceitful to everyone, but it was a different kind of deceit, and so we're kind of selecting on that basis, what is um what is additive to the story we're telling and what is kind of adjacent.
Yeah, that's interesting in how it reflects the kind of underlying concept or issue with the dating game itself, which is how do you know, or what are the sort of methods that make you comfortable with pursuing intimacy? That's really interesting. There seems to be uh, I know it was changed. Cheryl in the show didn't create new questions or insert her personality more, uh, but Anna Kendrick as Cheryl does, and it's a funny and illuminating look at her character. But why was that important to include?
So it's funny, like I said, I started researching this 8 years ago, and a lot of the information that's available now has changed since then. In some ways, there's more information. There's podcasts about Rodney Alcala that weren't there. There's articles, there's books that weren't there when I started. But there's also stuff that's gone away. So when I started this, you could find so many old episodes of the dating game on YouTube. Okay. And a lot of them have been taken offline now. But I do remember seeing one episode where there was this woman that was clearly going rogue. And I'm pretty sure she said something like, "What's the grossest thing the other person said backstage?" Or there was something like that where I'm just like, "Oh, there's no fucking way that like you were given that question to ask. You are choosing this." And and so even that, which seems very movie-ish, has a basis in fact. But beyond that, you know, um, it's tricky. I'm never totally sure what to talk about without spoiling the movie for people. But in a way, Cheryl is like the victim who wasn't, you know? And so you want to explore that and go like, okay, well, what's making her, what sets her aside? What enabled her to kind of sidestep this really terrifying situation? Um and so, I like the idea of her being someone who kind of sees the threat in front of her with very clear eyes. And again, because it's about the spectrum of misogyny, that threat can be a serial killer or it can just be a really toxic show. And her willingness to push back against that, I think, is kind of what makes her unique.
Yeah, absolutely. And also there is sort of a system of support with different characters helping in slight ways. The makeup designer, even the jerk contestant, you know, the waitress at the bar. There's little things that help. It's really well done. Anna Kendrick, I thought, did a really good job directing this. I don't know if it was in the script, but I love the motif of a hand sort of obtrusive, brushing aside hair, which happens a lot, or touching, just the way men's hands sort of invade women's space without consent. It's slight but consistent. I love that. Uh, when you heard she was passionate about the script and wanted to direct, what were your thoughts? Because I can imagine, oh, an actor wants to be a first-time director. Do I want my script to go through that?
Yeah, so a lot of thoughts. So, the movie almost died a lot of times over the years. Originally it was with Platinum Dunes, and then Platinum Dunes for a time disbanded, and the script just floated off, and then Boulder Light came on, and they decided to make it with Vertigo, and then Vertigo, and then pitched it to Netflix as an original, but then that went into turnaround, and then we got this new financier, AGC, and I'm just like, great, it's happening, it's gonna happen. And then just because of a scheduling conflict, our original director had to bow out, and I'm just like, it finally died for real. Like, all right, you know. And so when Anna raised her hand to direct, because we needed a director like now, you know, I was kind of like, oh, the movie might not die. This is great. But beneath that was just like, okay, but what's it going to be like? Because every director is going to put their own thumbprint on a movie, they can lead the script and the project in general in very different directions, not just narratively, but tonally. And I went over to her house and we had this long, lovely conversation. And I said, so how do you see the movie? And she goes, I kind of want it to be like Zodiac meets No Country for Old Men. And I'm just like, fuck yes. Like those are like two of my favorite movies, first of all. Um, but her clarity of vision was just very precise. She knew exactly what she wanted. She knew exactly what she didn't want. And that impacted the development of the script. We had a very short window to like do some revisions to kind of like hone in on the themes she found most interesting. And then she was kind of off and running. And, the movie has those kind of like Zodiac, No Country vibes, but there's also a lot of stuff in it that is like very like specific to Anna. I think the humor in particular is something that she really foregrounded in a way that I loved.
As an actor, sh there is kind of a weird similarity with Cheryl. Her smile and her nose, kind of.
Mhm.
I don't know. I found that when I saw an old clip of Cheryl. But yeah, I thought she did great. Was there, I guess, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. uh, a very different, like this was a long process. You had a different director before Anna stepped up. Uh, how different of a movie do you think that would have been?
I mean, it's tricky because I'm still friends with the old director. She's wonderful. Like I have nothing but good things to say about her. She also contributed to the development of the script at earlier stages in ways that are still in there and still important. And so, I think one of the things that Anna brought to it was a kind of commitment to staying as true to the actual events as we possibly could, you know? Um, because, in the course of a 90-minute movie, you're always there's going to be a little editorializing, a little fictionalizing, you know, um, hopefully it's always in service of getting at some deeper underlying truth, like the woman on the game show who like recognizes Rodney, that didn't happen in real life. But there were people in real life who saw their friends go off with this guy and they're just like, oh, he's creepy. And then their friends never seen again. They're just like, how come no one's knocking on his door? You know, and so like that was a place where we could include that real life perspective, Anyways, I'm sort of sidestepping the question. But yeah, no, so I think other versions may have been um that commitment to the actual events um and was probably the biggest thing. Some scenes got um smaller and darker as a result of her notes. Small in a good way, small being intimate, small being, you know, uh, yeah, and so I think that's something she brought. And so conversely, at one point when it was going to be a Netflix original, it was going to have a $30 million budget, and it was going to be, there would probably be more like Boogie Nights-esque moments in it where you're in a club and there's, 200 extras dancing and to disco music or whatever. It's like that's maybe like an alternate version that could have existed, which is flashier perhaps, but less emotionally grounded.
It's interesting. That's really, thank you. Well, I've taken up enough of your time. I really appreciate you discussing this. I thought it was infuriating in the best ways, just what it reminds you of, and just really well done. So,
Yeah,
congrats on this.
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Matt.